Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
The market's crazy. And a lot of buyers are overlooking certain negative aspects to homes that in the past, in slower years, have maybe been seen as red flags or maybe have helped them throw a lower number at the property. And we're talking about unpermitted renovations today, Jamie.
I was just about to ask what we're talking about here. Unpermitted renos.
They're extremely common. They all throughout Greater Vancouver. And our job as realtors is to kind of prepare buyers, get as much information as we can on what has been done to the home, what the city knows about, what the city does not know about. Was it done through a contractor? We want to see some receipts, but there's lots and lots of questions to ask. So I want to start with this. You are Mr. Construction on our team. What should be permitted? If someone is purchasing a 1960s home, New West, Burnaby, Tri-Cities, and they're thinking about doing a reno, what should they be aware of in terms of what the city is going to be looking for, and what should be permitted, what doesn't need to be permitted?
Good question, Denny. Great question. Let's talk specifically about unpermitted renos for detached houses.
Yes.
Because that's where it's most commonly, where we most commonly run into it. And yes, it's common. It is common. But as a realtor, we can never say it's okay. There is risks involved, and there's degrees of risk depending on what the unpermitted reno is. But in short, once you start affecting or changing structure, electrical, plumbing, those require permits. So if you are, if you're adding a partition wall and you're not touching electrical, plumbing, or anything, that is a cosmetic upgrade. If you're changing cabinets, that's a cosmetic upgrade. Those do not require permits. But the moment, say, you move a bathroom wall and that light switch has to go with it, that light switch movement requires an electrical permit. And if you're moving the sink along with the cabinets, that sink movement changes the drain location of the water line. That typically requires a permit. So anytime you are moving, the systems, now an electrician will pull their electrical permit, a plumber will pull their plumbing permit. But if you do a renovation that involves moving walls, moving plumbing, moving electrical, that involves detailed plans, and that involves the homeowner or the contractor pulling the permit. Mm-hmm. So there's degrees of renos. I think the most common, it depends on the market. Every market has their difference in what is unpermitted. And, for example, Burnaby for a long time was known for basement suites that weren't legal. For the longest time, there's so many basement suites in Burnaby, but a lot of them were all unauthorized. So, oftentimes if you are walking into a basement and you see a suite and you don't see a fire-rated door, or you see pot lights in the ceiling that break a fire, barrier, or you don't see a separate patio or a covered door entering into the basement suite. Those are certain requirements that a legal suite has. So, if you ever look at a city's website and look at a legal suite checklist, you're going to find that there is a lot of requirements there. Separate electrical panel. And if you're walking into a home and it doesn't have those things, odds are it's an unauthorized suite. Now, does that mean that the city is going to make you remove it? Well, probably not. Most cities don't have a good rep for kicking out tenants and reducing the housing supply by removing these suites, but that is the worst case scenario, that a suite could get removed, that they could force you to remove a stove and cap off the connection for that stove. Mm-hmm. That's often what they do. But yes, basement suites. Very common, Denny.
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
I just want to give a little bit more general knowledge for people maybe that are in the housing market right now that are seeing a lot of homes that are selling very quickly above asking, and they feel a bit rushed, like they're not getting to do any due diligence. So my next question for you is, why do people do unpermitted renos?
It's easier. It's easier.
And less time consuming.
Yeah. I mean, here's one story that we personally can take from this. The moment you pull a renovation permit over $100,000 in New Westminster, like we did for 405 2nd Street in Queen's Park, that triggered, because the house was over 50 years old, the connections at the street level where the water connections, the storm connections, they're all old. And so the moment you pull a permit over $100,000, for this 1932 character 3,500 square foot renovation, it triggered the requirement to upgrade the connections, which was expensive. I can't remember the details on it. I think it was like $40,000.
Yeah.
And with that particular house, we did not change the structure. It was just falling apart. We just replaced all the systems, did a full cosmetic renovation. In theory, we just fixed what was broken. But between all the city connections and everything, it just made it far more expensive, and it delays the process. So, a permit is the full peace of mind right way to do things. The reason why a lot of people don't do permits is, well, one, if it's a legal suite that they're trying to get, they may just not have the ability to make a legal suite in the structure they have, so they have no choice. Two, they want to save a few bucks. Three, they want to just do it quicker. And it doesn't make it okay. And I usually suggest that larger renos, well, I mean, all renos should have permits, Denny, but larger renos, it matters more. Yeah. If it's just simply updating a bathroom, there is still risk from a homeowner perspective, but it's a low consequence reno if you're just fixing an old bathroom. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For both realtors and buyers, where and what should they be looking for in terms of renovated homes? So I think a lot of, just because someone says like fully renovated home and there's no disclosures in terms of unpermitted renos, doesn't mean it's permitted. So it's important when you're buying a home, especially in busy markets when you have a small amount of time to do due diligence, to go the extra step, make the extra phone call to get your questions answered. And how do buyers and realtors find out about permits?
Every city has a different website. I mean, it's a real simple thing to just search city property information inquiry and see what pops up. Mm-hmm. City of New West has, I think, what is it? newwestcity.ca, North Van has GeoWeb. Every city has a different, and some require a login access code. So I can't speak for that. The information is freely available to the public. But if you just Google city property information inquiry and do some digging, you're going to usually find some sort of area in a city-related website where you can type in an address and look at the property specs and hopefully the permit history. Now, that is one way to do it. And I guess when you just rely on what's available online, you don't know what you're missing. So the follow-up due diligence after that is to phone the building department at the city. And real simple, just ask what the permit history is for this home. And so it could be something as simple as, they pulled a permit to film a movie there one weekend. Yeah. Or it could be, a permit for a garage done in the 50s. The house was built in the 40s. There's no history after the 50s, but they have a new kitchen downstairs. That's usually what you're looking for, is what is newer in the home and what is not showing up on the permit history. Mm-hmm. Now, recognize that the moment you phone the city, you're bringing up a permit with a listing that you don't necessarily own. So in theory, if there is unauthorized renovations in that home, you are phoning the city to highlight them. So just be aware of that. And I don't think there's a workaround there. If you want to do full due diligence, you need to know what you're buying. Yeah.
For me, as a realtor, on the buyer's end, my question is more just, can you share with me the permit history? And then I listen, make notes, write it down. I don't necessarily say, there's no permit for a suite. I'm more just listening. So I think as a buyer's agent, asking questions in a way that doesn't necessarily affect the current homeowner is probably the right move.
You want to get as much information out of the listing agent and seller as possible before you highlight what may come back to you if you buy the home with the city. And we have, cities come and go on their, alertness and attentiveness to basement suites and unpermitted renovations. But there are moments in time where I feel cities are on it, where they send letters out to any listing that they see that comes up with an unpermitted basement suite. Mm-hmm. And then there are years where it seems like there's no consequences. We have no stories to share at all about that. So from an agent perspective, we've sold hundreds of houses over the years, and we have very little stories of worst case scenarios. So it's easy to say, it's common to have unpermitted renos. The consequences, usually nothing happens. But when those one-off times happen, that's what you're terrified for. And, from an agent perspective, we're often representing buyers that are buying homes and need that income basement suite. And the house they like and all the homes they like seem to have these basement suites that look a little hokey, may not be, likely aren't a legal suite. And they're reliant on that income for the approval. And the bank doesn't seem to care if it's unauthorized. They seem to just look at the basement suite potential. I guess they feel that it's likely to stay as well. So in short, you get these buyers that are stretching themselves that need that income suite. The banks seem to be okay with it. They go for it. And as an agent, we still can't say, the city might make you take it out. It's one of those things. But yeah, the most, from an agent perspective, it's good to get as much information out of the seller. Basement suites are very common. If you walk into a 1950s home and you see kitchen, bathrooms, everything updated, you see an open concept kitchen where they opened up a wall. If there's no permit history and it's fully cosmetic, buyer beware. It can't make you feel good about it in terms of it not coming back to you, but what are the odds of it coming back to you? Pretty low, I would say.
I wanted to share like a specific example for maybe newer agents out there who haven't dealt with a lot of these older homes that have unpermitted renos. So maybe a week ago, we had a client buy in Coquitlam, and the home had a really nice reno that was all permitted except for the deck. They expanded a large deck off the back of the home and did not permit it. And the listing agent made it very clear, like he disclosed it properly. But I called Jamie and just asked him, how do you represent this to a buyer, and what questions are you asking about the deck to see, first of all, if it needed a permit, and second of all, if the city is ever going to have a problem with it. And I think maybe let's just like play out the scenario again.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing you asked me was, how high is it off the ground?
Yeah. If it was, and what I was getting at there is if it was, a wood structure less than 2 feet off the ground that didn't have significant structural, components to it or foundation, I think that would be a lower risk.
Yeah.
You don't need railings when it's under 2 feet if it's wood, and a lot of people do that. Just have a clean deck surface above the ground. But this one wasn't.
This one was on the second floor, and it was big.
And it was close to a property line, wasn't it? Or am I
no,
off?
this one wasn't.
It wasn't.
Speaking of the worst case scenarios, we have seen one of those in Coquitlam where someone, I don't know if I ever chatted with you about this, but they were backing onto a ravine, which you're not allowed to build into a ravine. And they had the previous owner, so my guys bought it, and the previous owner had put like concrete footings into the ravine and had started building this deck, and one of the neighbors complained. So the previous owner had to like rip out all of the work. So it was kind of a nightmare. And in terms of like protecting the buyer going into that situation, that all that work was going to be done prior to completion is a long-winded answer.
I think you nailed one good point there. Neighbor complaint.
Yeah.
That's probably the most common thing that would get a basement suite on the radar from a city perspective. An unauthorized basement suite that's illegal. But your neighbor and a deck that's going over a ravine, or in some cases, there are some beauties out there that just like building whatever they want to build on their home and without consequence. And some, you drive by some of these homes in the city, and there are people that have done significant extensions off the top floor that are hugging a property line that are clearly illegal, but they're there and they've probably been there for 20 years. So I think one thing to kind of highlight is passing the test of time or whatever the saying is. But if a reno is clearly, if there's an extension or some sort of addition to a home, and it's been there for 30, 40, 50 years, and it has no permits, that's actually a common scenario that we run into with some of these older renos. And we can't say it's okay, but it has passed the test of time. And so, again, it comes down to probabilities. And these older renos that have been around for a long time, what's the probability of it being undone? And, to me, it's low, but if you want 100% certainty, we can't give that to you. Yeah.
Exactly. We've sold a few homes in the last year that I can remember that have done unpermitted extensions. So a couple of them had been there for 15, 20 years. And the likelihood of that ever coming back to you is really, really low. But as the construction is going on, as a neighbor sees you extending 8-10 feet off the back of your home or building this massive deck that they don't have, and they're in a subdivision that their home looks pretty similar to yours and they've got a small deck and you're now building this massive deck, that could be the trigger where the city gets involved because a neighbor complains. But 20 years down the road, if that thing's been there for a while and a new neighbor moves in, they're not, like, the likelihood of them calling the city and saying, hey, their deck's bigger than mine is pretty low.
Like how you worded that too. So in the instance that Denny brought up the other week, it was a second floor deck, and the question, well, one, I asked how high it was, and then the moment it was second floor, I was curious about structure.
Yeah.
Right. So if someone's building a deck on the second level or an extension of any kind, and they didn't have a structure, they didn't do all the structural paperwork according to permits, or even they may have missed opportunities for city inspections at key points of time. And if there's no structural plans or structural engineers signing off on them, and the thought there is, how will a city approve this if will an engineer put their stamp on it? So that's a little bit out of my expertise, but anytime you're dealing with an extension or something significant that involves structural, if you don't do the permit process, you're missing out on that opportunity to give the city peace of mind that an engineer approved it, that you did follow plans, that you did the proper inspections at the key points that they can see them. If you don't do that, you're left with this high-risk reno. And I call anything on the outside a higher risk, unpermitted reno. So this one, there was no closure. It was...
Well, so for this one, I had called you the night after we saw it. Okay. So the city wasn't open. I couldn't chat with the city yet. And anyway, we had this conversation about questions to ask the listing agent, and they did have structural plans that were pretty good, and they're actually going through the process of permitting with the city. But I called the city in the morning, and it was funny. They didn't. They had permit history, so they had electrical, they had a gas permit, they had a plumbing permit for the big reno that was done inside the home, but nothing regarding the deck. And then the lady at the city says, "Oh, actually, there was a complaint filed by the neighbor, 30 days ago about a deck." I said, "Okay, there it is."
There it is.
So, and it so happened that the seller was actually going through the process with the city with the structural plans that they had done with the deck, and it was done properly. And it seemed like the city was going to be okaying what they had done, which gave the buyer enough peace of mind to move forward. But yeah, it was just kind of a long workaround.
Now, they might be a lucky situation where the deck was built to code and they had the structural done, they just didn't do permits. Yeah. And I believe that might be one of those scenarios where, there could be additional costs and inspections afterwards, but they might be able to get that authorized by the city. It's not a common thing we run into. The one that I've run into a few times is bathrooms and plumbing. And the moment those pipes are in concrete floors and underground, and the city finds out about those renos, they can't pass that plumbing inspection if they don't have their person come out and look at the work exposed. So I've run into more than one scenario where, whether it was a basement suite that was discovered, or a buyer bought a home and wanted to make all the renos permitted that were done, or all the additions and alterations permitted. So they had a city inspector come out to the home to take a look. And unfortunately, just because the plumbing was in the ground, all of that ground had to get jackhammered up and exposed. Otherwise, they just couldn't sign off on it. Mm-hmm. So there are certain things, that's where the plumbing in the ground, that's the risk. That's the worst case scenario, that you buy a place, you love the renos, you bring it to the city's attention, or the city gets caught wind of it, and there's plumbing and concrete ground that needs to be exposed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You shared some info about unauthorized basement suites. I think it's important to note that what's a rough percentage? 90% of suites throughout Greater Vancouver are unauthorized. And I think you made a good point that
let's call it 80.
80?
I don't know. I'm throwing up a random number here, Denny.
I think that's low, but we'll go with it. I think it's important to, you noted that a lot of homes, just based on how, the age, the structure of them, the height in the basement, wouldn't qualify for a legal suite. And so a lot of people that are buying into older homes need the extra income, and they're putting suites in illegally because they just can't check all the boxes of putting in a legal suite in. A lot of new construction does suites do suites properly, and that's where most of the legal suites are. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to touch on the suite designation, there is a legal suite, which is, call it fire rated. There's higher fire rating drywall. There's no pot lights in the ceiling to penetrate through the drywall for fire to escape through. There's usually exterior doors that block, between the suite and the rest of the house. Separate electrical panel. Those are some obvious signs for a legal suite. There is also a designation as an in-law suite, which doesn't have all that. So that's for new construction. So you can have an in-law suite that doesn't have all the same requirements as a legal suite. When we're going to 50-year-old homes, that's where you'd often run into homes that just couldn't possibly make the legal suite requirements, whether it's ceiling height or whatever it is. There's a lot of different scenarios. And a lot of cities are pretty accommodating to those suites. They don't want to take liability for them if they were built without permits, but they'll sometimes just call it an unauthorized suite that is, I don't know, they might have a different term for it. It's accepted by the city, where the city's aware of it, so they charge the homeowner more garbage and utilities to accommodate for that additional suite, but it's just not a legal suite. So I think a lot of cities that are okay with these, they don't want to reduce housing options for people that need them. They don't want to force these suites to be shut down and put people on the streets. So they'll just have a different designation for it once they find out about it and charge the homeowner a little more.
I think the term you're looking for is authorized.
It's authorized. It's unpermitted, but authorized by the city. So,
when you see authorized suite, that does not mean legal.
Yeah.
It means the city knows about it and they're paying extra garbage, water, sewer for it. But it doesn't mean it's legal.
No.
The last thing I wanted to just quickly touch on is the appropriate way for listing agents to disclose unpermitted renovations and authorized suites. So there is a document that should be done. So technically, unpermitted renovations and unauthorized suites are material latent defects. So there is a separate document that should be filled out with the seller disclosing exactly what is unpermitted and that you have an unauthorized suite. A lot of realtors do not do this form, and it should be done. And on the PDS, there's a section that is asking you if there's any latent defects, and that should be checked yes if there's unpermitted renos. It does not get done a lot of the time.
No, I see that all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And aside from basement suites, like basement suites are a very common reno that we run into. It could be as simple as just adding a bathroom in a basement, that never existed, like a lot of these older homes. So, we talk about suites, but anything bathroom, kitchen, there's a difference between, and I guess one thing to highlight is today's permitting process is a lot more difficult than it was 40 years ago. And today's building code is different than it was years ago. So there's, a big reason why people don't pull permits is because of all the extra requirements. You want to do a bathroom reno, and you might have to get a tree arborist report and put tree barriers outside for when the trucks pull up, because they don't want the trees affected when they have the trucks going in and out and the workers going in and out. So the cost to just break ground with the paperwork can sometimes be $5,000 for a reno. That might be $5,000. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with this, Danny, but when we're doing that PDS form for these 100-year-old homes, we often see signs of whether it's like a staircase moved or a little punch out off the back or someone carving out the attic space to put a room up there. There's often other things that we just want to disclose on those sheets just to be safe. So it's not limited to basement suites. No.
100%.
And the other thing, I think a really common one, just look out for sheds like in the yard too that have power. There's a lot of people that do hokey things out in the yard. Whether it's a shed, whether it's a garage, very common. I'd say in East Vancouver anywhere. Yeah.
I like it. Carl, what do you think? Did you learn something?
So just reiterate, every city has a website that you can look up the permit history. If you don't go to the website, phone the building department of the city, ask, what is the permit history of this home? Are there any open permits? Open permits are not what you want. That means that permit hasn't fulfilled all its duties. I think that's it, Dan.
I like it.
And we've done a blog post on buying a house before, 10 steps of due diligence to do when buying a house. So if you Google 10 steps of due diligence, Garbutt Dumas, you'll find our blog post from 2016 about this topic.
And one of the steps is calling the city to find out if there's any open permits.
Yeah. I think we're talking about step 2 here.